All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this online policy dialogue. I see that many of you are signing in, so I'm just going to give a few more seconds to let everybody come into the room. As you see, one of our speakers is inside the plane, so we want to make the best out of this session as much as we can before she needs to go. So we have already plenty of people in the room, so welcome everyone again to this policy dialogue on Germany's new foreign policy. What can we expect? For those that don't know me, my name is Ricardo Borges de Castro. I'm an associate director and head of Europe in the World program here at the European Policy Center. This event is being organized together with Connecting Europe at the EPC and also the German Council on Foreign Relations. For those that don't know, Connecting Europe is a joint initiative by the EPC and Stiftung Mercator that connects civil society organizations and EU decision makers and the broader EU policy community. So these are our hosts, and today's event, I think the two main objectives will be to look at the priorities of the new German government in its foreign policy, but also look at areas of potential cooperation and collaboration between the EU and Germany, and also, I mean, Brussels and Berlin, how the machineries of foreign policy can actually work in these two capitals. And I mean, to address this topic, we have three outstanding and very knowledgeable speakers. So Hannah Neumann, a member of the European Parliament from the Greens. Then Anna Sauerbrey, Deputy Chief Editor of Tagesspiegel, and last but not least, Christian Mölling, Research Director at the German Council on Foreign Relations, DGAP. So in terms of sequence, we will start with Anna Sauerbrey to give a brief overview of the current state of German foreign policy, priorities of the new government, and also what to expect of these first months of foreign policy. Then we'll go to Christian Mölling, and Christian will present some recommendations of a big study that the GFP has done on priorities for German foreign policy. And then we'll move on to Hannah Neumann, that will provide probably more the take from the EU perspective on policy areas where Germany and the EU might collaborate. Following this first three presentations, we will have about 30 minutes for a Q&A session with you that have decided to join us. Almost 450 people registered to participate today, so we have many of you there, and so we invite you to write your questions in the Q&A box or to raise your hand, and I'll bring you in to the discussion. What I would ask is that either in written form or spoken form, please keep the questions short so that we can bring as many as possible, or I can read them at a glance. I think we meet at a very consequential and sobering moment for Europe and the world, and for the EU's foreign and security policy, as Russia seeks to rewrite Europe's security architecture. Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock was just in Kyiv yesterday, and she had talks with her counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, this morning in Moscow. The press conference just finished. I'm not going to speak more about this because maybe some of our speakers will want to address this issue. I should say that NATO Secretary General is also in Berlin today to speak with Chancellor Scholz, and that Secretary Blinken will be in Berlin as well towards the end of this week. But there's more. I mean, Germany has taken the presidency of the G7 for 2022. Chancellor Scholz also spoke with Premier Li Keqiang yesterday on Germany-China relations and also EU-China relations. So there's a lot of foreign policy happening on many fronts in Berlin, in Brussels. But I think it's with this context of so many events happening in the space of foreign and security policy that I would now turn to our guests. And so Anna Sauerbrey, I mean, what can we expect of the new German government in terms of foreign policy? Also, of how do you evaluate this first month? I mean, it's very recent, but what is your take? And for around 5-6 minutes, if you could give us your impressions so far. Thank you very much. Floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Ricardo, and hello to everyone. it is a very exciting day with the press conference just finished, and I think a lot of what we will see from the German government was sort of in a nutshell in that statement that we saw from Annalena Baerbock at the press conference, which I've tried to follow just before coming to this room, this digital room. I think that the traffic light coalition unites different approaches and foreign policy and different philosophies, but how different you may see them, I guess, depends very much on the angle you take. If you look at it from a very broad global angle, you will probably find that this German traffic light coalition very much continues along the fundamentals of German foreign policy, as we have also seen them under Angela Merkel. So when you look at things like defense spending, you will have the usual reluctance, a commitment on more defense spending on one side, but also a reluctance for military involvement, with some nuances within the coalition, with the Liberals rather on the pro side of more spending and the Greens and the Social Democrats rather on the reluctant side. You will also see that when it comes to enhancing and further developing the European Union, you have a very strong commitment towards further developments within the European Union in the coalition treaty, with some nuances within the coalition, reluctance from the Liberals when it comes to further financial integration, and the Social Democrats and the Greens being more open to that. Then the broad lines of commitment to NATO, strong commitment to old friends and allies such as France, Israel, and the United States. That's all on the continuing side of this new coalition. But then, of course, there's some new elements, and I think we saw that in the statement too. One will definitely be that climate policies will be more on the forefront of German policies. And Annalena Baerbock has stressed that during her first visits. We have seen it yesterday in Ukraine, where she also met with a high representative in Ukraine responsible for green gas development. And she stressed that during the press conference today with Lavrov, laying out the many possibilities there would be if relations were better between Russia and Germany for cooperation in the field of battling climate change. We also see some new nuances on China in the coalition treaty. There are three dimensions mentioned in relation to China. It's partnership, competition, and systemic rival, which is new in comparison to the old coalition treaty of the Grand Coalition, where China used to be labeled a strategic partner. Of course, this has evolved during Merkel's last term already, but now it's a completely new wording. Yes, I think we will see that play out this year with Germany's G7 presidency. I think that this will be used to further cooperation between nations that have more ambitious goals when it comes to climate change. A climate club is one of the goals that the coalition has announced to pursue. And I think we will see first steps this year. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Anna, for being so brief, but to give us basically the two strands of continuity and change in German foreign policy. I think very useful for our discussion. I would now turn to Christian to ask him, I mean, in terms of what priorities should a new government focus on in terms of foreign policy, and what would you recommend, for example, in terms of security and defense? I mean, given it's also a topic that Anna just referred to, where maybe the coalition members might not see exactly the same way. So, in terms of the study, what would be some of the key recommendations that you would make for this, initial remarks for us today? Thank you very much, Christian.
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo, and thanks to the EPC for having us and co-hosting that event with us, which is quite a pleasure to be with you. The study that we have written kind of in view of the incoming government, named Smart Sovereignty, you can find it on our website, of course, focuses on some of the aspects that you just mentioned, on the challenges. And if you take a look into the coalition agreement, which in general in Germany is quite an important document. So this is not a small thing, it's a big thing, which at the end of the government turn everybody will go through and say, okay, check boxes, what have you delivered? So it's an important document which spells out quite important language. I guess what has kind of checked, so what was kind of the recommendations, the report, and also made it into the government document is a strong message on NATO and on European security, so a strong commitment, which you always have to see in a context of the government before, and many questions that have been put out by some governmental actors at that time behind NATO. You had Trump, etc., etc. So that was one thing. And the second linked to that is the question of nuclear deterrence and the German contribution in a way of nuclear sharing that is ensured. So that was hammered into that document. And if you linked elements of the document, of the government document, you can say that's a strong message in there, with also commitments to nuclear arms control, which is also part of it, which is classical German DNA, to link the two things. So that's a good thing, I would say. So especially with regard to, I guess, the discussion that we will have in some minutes, that's something where in theory, Germany has to be strong, or in language. What we have still to wait for, and I mean, this government is only in place now for 2 months, so we kind of, shouldn't expect too much of miracles here, is a national security strategy, which will also give the government the opportunity to link the various instruments of security more effectively. This is a big thing for this country for 2 reasons. First of all, culturally and from a constitutional point of view, internal and external security have always been divided for various good reasons. But if we take a look into the challenges, this has become more and more ineffective since more than 2 decades. So the national security strategy can be a way, it's another opportunity to link these instruments more effectively. There wasn't the time in the government negotiations end of last year to also fix this thing. And I fully have understanding for that. But if we take a look into the current challenges with regard to Eastern Europe, but also to longer term challenges, the linking of the the toolbox of classical foreign security, but also technology issues, industrial issues, are questions of, you call it, as we call it, smart sovereignty or strategic sovereignty, as it is called in the document. But if we miss on this, I guess we'll still remain a weak spot in Europe and within the European Union. And that's something you can't wish for as long as you are on the European side. Maybe I stop here first.
Okay, thank you very much, Christian, also to give us that already sort of just a teaser on the study and this, this idea of smart sovereignty that maybe you might want to explore a little bit later, also bringing sort of more traditional elements of foreign policy with newer developments that are happening. But then if I can now, I would turn to Hannah and Neumann. Anna, I think I think our audience and us, what we would like to understand is also from your standpoint, where does the EU and Germany can actually collaborate and add value in terms of foreign policy? I know that, of course, you have a special interest on some of the areas that Anna mentioned as climate, for example, but also the the idea of a feminist foreign policy. I know that this is also a topic that for you is relevant, or the strategic compass that it is expected to be approved here in Brussels in March at the council. So, I mean, what are your reflections about Germany's new foreign policy and how some of these files and these processes will be taken forward? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ricardo. And first of all, apologies for the very weird situation I am in. COVID also hit me. My Turkish Airlines flight this morning was cancelled. And we are running into passenger announcements right now, but I hope you can understand me well so I can make my points. Can I just, there, perfect. I'm just going to pick it up right from where Christian left, and I would like to make 4 points. The first one is making German foreign policy more European. The second one, picking up on your remarks on feminist foreign policy. The third one on climate. And the fourth one, which is what we have clearly seen today also with the statement in Russia, this dichotomy of dialogue and Härte, which is most likely going to guide German foreign policy also towards the European Union. The first one, making German foreign policy more European. I think it's clearly important, and there we will hopefully move away from what the previous German government did, is in this geopolitical battles that we have, mainly with China and Russia. Hopefully there are not new ones coming up, but you never know. We really want to move together as a European Union and make very clear that what they try to do, divide et impere, so dealing with the French, dealing with the German, dealing with the Greeks, and trying to push the EU apart is not going to work. That's also what is behind that statement. If you want to talk about European security, you need to talk to Europe, meaning the European Union, vis-a-vis Lavrov, but also Biden. On the feminist foreign policy, this will be one of the key running topics, not just because Annalena Baerbock is a woman, but because also on European level with the Gender Action Plan 3 and other activities coming, it is very clear if you want to push back against these autocrats, but also the backlash against women's rights and really uphold the idea that this world can be more democratic, more fair, more human rights, the first thing we need to deal with is the women's issue in terms of representation. That's quite clear. But also when it comes to resources, dealing with the rights issues. Third one is climate. The European Union domestically is quite on track with the Green Deal, Fit for 55. There have been issues around the nuclear, but in terms of how can we reach our own Paris goals. But CO2 emissions globally are only coming to 10% from the European Union. So as long as we don't manage to bring the other countries on board, and especially the big powers, the Gulf countries, China, Russia again, we are not going to solve the problem, because there is no such thing as European warming. There's just a global warming. And this will be key, not just for German, but also European foreign policy. And they are very well aligned. One of the first testing points is going to be the Gulf strategy that the European Commission and the we want to publish in the first half of 2022, that I really think should center around this whole issue of energy and climate cooperation. We have also seen that in the discussions today in Russia. And the last one, the dialogue and counterpoint. So basically meaning dialogue, but also being very strong in terms of our values. And it's that duality that I think is very important in the complexity of the world that we have now, so that we stand up to our values, we stand up to human rights, we stand up to the European approach, yet at the same time we are open for cooperation, especially in the climate area, but also in the feminist foreign policy area and wherever we have mutual interests. Of course, in each individual place, it's a balancing act. It's always going to be a balancing act, but that will be the biggest direction. Because you mentioned the strategic compass just briefly. It's good that for the first time also member states discuss on their cooperation on European level, because previous strategy documents were all coming from the Commission, and the ownership, let me put it that way, wasn't too big on the member state side. I hope the compass is going to be ambitious. This government, you could also see it in the coalition agreement, clearly says we need to work together more in European defense. We would also be willing to commit just 2 minutes financial resources, but it needs to come with transparency, political oversight, and there may be a battle ahead when it comes to arms export, where the new German government is very clear on strict regulation, whereas other governments, especially the French one, but not only, kind of move more towards very lax implementation. But as we are producing arms together more and more, this will be more and more a source of conflict, and I hope you'll find a solution to that one soon.
Thank you, Hannah. I saw that there was someone basically telling you that you need to turn off, but if I can, and this is a question for the three, and maybe I'll start with you. I mean, I remember from 2011, it was, it was relative to a completely different topic, that Radesh Sikorski basically said that I fear, German power less than I fear German inaction. And so my question is that on foreign policy, do you think that Germany as a nation is ready to be more active in foreign policy in addressing so many of these issues? And this is a question that I would like to ask also Christian and Anna. Hannah, for you.
I think for this new coalition, it is very clear that we have to be more active. We have a more active agenda. And I really hope that we will be able to push a few of these things ahead. There are disagreement in very few things on which the media usually focuses, which is like the Social Democrats' position on Russia. But in general, especially when it comes to standing up against autocracies with the liberal democratic understanding of where we want to go. We are united, and you can. And I think that was clearly visible in the statement of Annalena Baerbock today. With Lavrov, you really can count on a more active German foreign policy.
All right, thank you, Anna. I mean, the same question for you, Anna and Christian. Anna, what's your take on this? Do you see, even, I mean, with the coalition partners, do you see willingness to play a more active role in foreign policy? Or do you think actually events will make Germany have to have that role?
Yes, I think Germany will be forced into playing a more active role, and we certainly see the rhetoric. But I do wonder, what are the means of the German government to be more active? I think Russia is a very good example that we have seen in the past days, that that there is disagreement on what sanctions should be enacted, how strong the sanctions should be. Of course, Nord Stream 2 was on the table, was then taken off the table by some in the Social Democratic Party, but you also saw the split within the Social Democratic Party, with some promoting that Nord Stream 2 be used as a means to sanction Russia in case of further aggression in Ukraine, and others opposing it. So I think it will depend, as Hannah Neumann said, on the situation. I think there will be more agreement on certain topics in the European Union, but the past days have shown that it actually weakens Germany's position in international relations if such agreements are weak, or if there is no agreement within one party or between the coalition partners.
Thank you, Anna. Christian, for you too.
Yeah, I think Anna is very right in pointing out the toolbox that the government has or does not have. And I guess especially the question is, do you know your power instruments and do you trust in them? So what we have is there's a general outline, which is a very strong language. And there is no doubt that let's say on the general terms of trade, I would say the government agrees. But then if it comes to the nitty-gritty of the implementation, a lot of stumbling blocks pop up. That may still be normal, but what you can see is what many of us predicted is there is a steep learning curve for the government that is now taking place, and we are watching it real time with this hot crisis we are currently in. And it's a make it or break it moment, at least for the next month, for this government, whether they are able to put their act together and say, okay, we can deliver something here, or whether we remain fragmented and split up by several comments that are coming from this and that corner of the government. Plus, I guess the next phase of the learning curve, sorry, will also be, how do our partners and how do the Russians basically respond to it? One very important point to this, who is profiting most from that for the moment is China, because we are redirecting our energy to a tactical battle, which is, for good reasons, absorbing a lot of political energy for the moment. And that basically puts other people in the back burner, or other actors in the back burner, and gives them more room for maneuver currently.
Christian, thank you for bringing that. Hannah, given that you're still with us, and there's, I mean, this is an unavoidable question that Anna has already referred to, Nord Stream 2, and how it may play in the situation that we're trying to address with Russia, also the coalition partners. We know that there are differences, or have been differences among the coalition partners on Nord Stream 2. So how do you see this evolving? Do you think that at some point minds will meet in this regard, or do you think there will be a complete separation and this will be very hard sell to take?
I mean, frankly said, there's just a split within the Social Democrats. The Liberals and especially the Greens have been very clear on Nord Stream and very united with our European partners that Nord Stream is not just a technological, but also a political project, and it's becoming more and more political, the bigger and bigger the tensions with Russia are. What we're doing at the moment, and I think that de-escalates a bit internally, we are looking into it from authorization, technical, is it according to the EU standards perspective? And depending on the outcome of this one, yes, we will have some kind of a very serious political discussion inside this coalition. But clearly, even the Social Democrats are split. You saw the Schmidt yesterday or this morning saying we cannot take any kind of anything that can put more political pressure off the table.
Thank you very much. If I can already start bringing in some of the questions from our audience, questions are starting to pile up. I'm going to go, for the first question that I'm going to take now is from Moritz Kleff, and I'm going to read it because I think it's just best that I do that. How would you evaluate the loss in importance of the German foreign ministry vis-a-vis the chancellery? Would you say that the Foreign Office is still the most relevant actor in foreign policy questions in Germany, and do you see a need for reform? So maybe Anna, given that you're still with us, I will start with you and then go to Christian and Anna. Anna, who's the real player in foreign policy in Germany now?
Okay, because the plane is rolling, but I meant foreign policy if the Chancellery and the Ministry of Foreign Policy have a joint foreign policy. Otherwise, there's not going to be a German foreign policy. So they will have to deal with each other. The whole Delhi work is clearly happening in the MFA, and that's also setting the standards and the priorities. And now it gets very late in my face. But for the big negotiations, and we saw that with Merkel, sometimes you need the Chancellor and the head of state to do it. But frankly said, everyone's focusing on Russia now, which is a bit tricky in the coalition. Aside of that, I don't see major conflicts at the moment.
All right. Thank you, Anna, and safe travels, safe flight. Thank you. All right, I would go again, same question for you, Christian, and then Anna.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's rather maybe 2 points on that. So first, the Foreign Office came out of the government negotiations very strong because it positioned itself with good personnel very strong. So the MOD, we're still questioning what's going on there in the Ministry of Defense, and the Chancellor's office is more focusing on other things. There is no Europe coordinator for the moment in the Chancellor's office, which is a very important position. So I guess for the moment, the Foreign Office is winning back some of the territory that it has lost over 16 years of Merkel basically running foreign policy on the most important dossiers. That doesn't need to remain that. I guess it depends very much on the government mechanics that we can't see for the moment in full swing, because some key positions in the Chancellor's office, but also in the Foreign Office, have not been filled so far. And this will be a pure power play between the Greens and the Social Democrats. And when it comes to conflicting issues like exactly the question over Russia, but also what's the balance between social transformation, solidarity, and climate change, that will be the tricky questions for this government, and also between the Chancellor's office and various other ministries.
Thank you, Christian. Anna, your take on this question.
Yes, I agree with Christian that this is a moment of reconfiguration of the relation between the Chancellery and the Foreign Office, as we see new personnel coming in, but also as Merkel has left, and we don't know yet whether Olaf Scholz will will step into her very large footsteps. I do think he has the potential. He's very well connected internationally, as he has worked as a Minister of Finance within the G7 and the G20, and has had some really big successes internationally, finding partners to create a global minimum tax, for example. So I do think he does have some potential there, and already knows many of the global players, or many on the international stage that Germany is traditionally working with in Canada, in the United States, in France. He does have friends there. But it's also a moment where, as Christian said, new people come in, very ambitious. We have a very ambitious foreign minister, I would say. And I think there's room for both, also when it comes to climate policies. I think the Greens will claim that field of international climate policies within the coalition, and I think there are some important steps to go. Let's see what she can move in that field.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think also, I mean, this trend where prime ministers or chancellors or presidents of government have had more and more responsibilities in foreign policy, it's actually a trend that you can observe in many European countries. So it's not specific to Germany, but it's true that with the coalition makes things different, because you have a leader of another party that is member of the coalition as the foreign minister. So this, of course, in terms of power calculations, domestic politics then also would play a role here. If I can go to the next question or questions, I'll start with one. This is from Finbar Birmingham. He's the Europe correspondent for the South China Morning Post, and his question is: where do you see the new German government on the Lithuania-China issue? With German companies now involved, does Berlin have to take action? So, and you had mentioned, Christian, already China, but how do both of you anticipate Germany dealing with this issue of Lithuania and China? Anna, let's go to you first.
I think there's only one sentence on Taiwan in the German coalition treaty, as far as I remember, saying that Germany will support Taiwan in participating in discussions in international organizations. I would rather expect to Germany trying to limbo through that situation. I think we will neither see a comparative or an approach that will be compared to Lithuania's approach in fully embracing Taiwan as a partner. But that's just a wild guess. I haven't spoken to anyone in the German government on that question. So maybe Christian can say a little more about that.
And here, I mean, I can just complement with the second question that Finbar had, which is also whether, I mean, in general on China policy, would you anticipate a tug of war between the SPD and the other coalition partners? Because, in his words, Scholz seems to prefer status quo, but the FDP and the Greens won't change or want to have a sort of probably a more muscular foreign policy towards China. So, I mean, if both of you can address, I'll turn to Christian and then to you, Anna, again.
Yeah. Thanks, Ricardo. I think it's very interesting to see that this three-party coalition is on some of the issues split. There's split within the parties, because the Social Democrats during the last government term, they have published a rather strong paper on China. This, of course, the strong language may be muted now that you are kind of the senior partner in government on the one hand, plus you have a more economy-friendly chancellor. That may be the case. Plus you see into the realities that some of our bigger industrial companies are still dependent on China. But there's another split, and this is the split between the companies in Germany. Some companies realize that they are no longer winning from China. We have made our money out of China. And now, as it is with good economic actors, you say, hold on, actually, it's not paying off any longer. This may not be the traditional car producers, but it may be the future industry. So the question of, can the government afford politically and economically to play a different China policy will depend very much on the business model that we can envisage and the timelines that we have, that we can afford to change basically the value chain on these things. So if I put that short, I think for short term there will be no much of a change of German-China policy, especially with regard to economics. A little bit more on language on human rights. Yes, that's something that you have to do, but I guess the Chinese can handle that. And especially for the Taiwan point that Anna brought up, I think you still have to face the reality that is, this may be a new government, but we are still in the same old strategic culture, which means in terms of the mental mindset of what are the political options, this mental mindset has not widened that much or that tremendously. So we're still looking into the same options and the same reflexes you will see over the next year, I guess, at least. Until then, we'll see what the new security strategy brings.
Thank you, Christian. Anna, also another word on this potential tug of war between coalition partners and China.
Yes, I mean, the Green Party has been very vocal on human rights issues in China. Annalena Baerbock has promised to address that during visits or meetings with Chinese officials. The Greens have also brought up import restrictions on products from regions where we know that human rights are violated, like Xinjiang. But as Christian said, we also know that many big German companies such as Volkswagen do produce in the area. And I haven't seen anyone spell out yet what exactly that would mean if we had import restrictions from Xinjiang to Germany, with many great big German companies producing there. So I guess that's going to be a difficult and painful process of making announcements before the election fit the complicated realities that Christian has mentioned.
Thank you very much, Anna, for adding those additional points. Thank you very much. I have another question from the audience, from Adam Isaacs, and he basically, I mean, he asks, the Merkel government signed an agreement with the UK government, which was hoped would presage closer and more constructive relations going forward. How will the new government approach relations with the UK, as there does not seem to be the same instinctive Anglophobia as that Merkel showed? So relations with the UK, what both of you what would be your take on the future of relations between Germany and UK under this new government? Anna, Christian, I don't know who would like to go first. It's a question, right? Christian, go ahead.
I can buy Anna some time, because this is a tough question. So I'll just throw out some ideas. I mean, I guess it's an interesting calculation for the current government in Germany. Take a look all over Europe, because what you can see is, or you could interpret it as, social democracy is on the rise again. So that could put the German government, especially Social Democrats, into a wait-and-see position, and see once Labour is strong enough to have more support for a Labour-ruled government and make offers into a direction they could use in domestic politics. I guess for the moment, everybody just fears to get too close to the British government, because everybody sees it's a government that will only remain in place until there is a constructive solution. So until there is somebody who can take over from Boris Johnson, or whether political competitors outside the Tory parties are strong enough. That may be a little bit kind of blue-eyed, simply because the UK is such a strong partner, especially on the security side. You wouldn't call it dependency, but what we are currently losing, because the Germans are so much EU Europeans by heart, is the fact that Europe is bigger than the European Union, and that at the end of the day, if it's going bad for the UK, it's also going bad for Europe, I guess. So that's something where I guess that it's another challenge for squaring the circle on how do we keep the UK, or keeping the door open for the UK. And maybe, just throwing in the last idea here, maybe it's time for a new political project here, because we are spending a fortune currently on developing two different fighter jet systems. This could be a political project, because it's so expensive that politically the Germans, the French, and the Brits in 3 or 4 years' time could possibly invest politically, militarily, and financially into, and by that have a hook again to work on something constructively.
Thank you, Christian. Anna, would you want to add any thoughts from your side?
No, not much. I think it is there is a even larger cultural divide between government made up of Greens, Social Democrats, and Liberals, and the Boris Johnson government, and especially the Greens have followed Brexit on the European level within the EU Parliament and the negotiations with great anger, and I think that will feed back into whatever relations there are. But who knows how long the British government will still be the British government we see right now. So maybe there is a new start to be made.
Thank you, and also, I mean, for reminding us, I think normally sometimes when we discuss foreign policy, there's a tendency, not everybody does this, to think on foreign policy as separated from domestic politics, but domestic politics has huge influence, as we all know, on foreign policy and sometimes on foreign policy choices. And I think with the coalition government, I mean, be it in Germany or other places, this does have an impact. So thank you for bringing that sort of the nuance, because I think this is one of the elements that I believe that our audience and myself, even to learn more about the German system, and now under these conditions, sometimes the nuance between the political parties, the debate, even in the Bundestag, you know, what are key players really sort of saying about these issues. So I think this is really useful insight for all of us that then also need to think, how can we actually collaborate and take foreign policy in general in the EU forward also with Germany. If I can take another question now from Paul Taylor. And his question, I think I will direct this question to Christian. He says, if German law prevents Germany from exporting arms to crisis zones, should it also prevent Ukraine from using NATO's procurement agency and bar allies from using German airspace to deliver supply defensive equipment to Kiev? This looks both crazy and cowardly. This is his words.
So I think there are many things possibly mixed up, but at least are coming into this question. Because first of all, German law does not, in principle, prevent Germany from exporting arms also in crisis zones. We have done that in the last government with support by the Greens, who have been in opposition. It is a political decision that the government can take. There is freedom of maneuver for the government to take such a decision. Whether Germany can prevent Ukraine using the NATO agency, I don't know. But they're pretty much, you have what we currently see or what we have seen, I guess, over the last 24, 48 hours on Germany commenting on arms exports, which is not the right term on these things, blah, 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 is basically Greens keeping the line on their constituencies, because this is something where when Germany has supplied arms to the Yazidis at that time, some years ago, that should have been once in a political lifetime, so to say, and not become a point of reference for doing that further on. But again, here the party, as far as I understand, still is split. The Greens on is it correct to deliver weapons or not? Second point on that. I mean, now it's too late. And whatever you deliver there, you can't train people on that unless you start operating it by yourself. So this is not a strategic, this is a tactical debate, I would say. And if you ask me on what to do, I would say, is it good if the German government supports or weakens Ukrainian defense, and by that weakens the defense of a free country in Europe? I would say no, it is not. The question is, can we learn something out of that and have a policy change on our policy towards Ukraine in the face of an ongoing conflict and a military element of that conflict that we may see soon in the next weeks?
Thank you, Christian. I don't know, Anna, if you would want to add something to this.
Yes, just on the question of support, I think that we will hardly see weapons delivered to Ukraine anytime soon, though we've had that debate and we have had some support from the Green Party. Robert Habeck once mentioned that during the German campaign, whether defense weapons could be delivered, and we do deliver weapons to crisis zones when these the most famous example is Israel. This is definitely a country that's potentially at war, but it is a very close ally to Germany. So Germany provides arms to Israel. I think it is a political decision. I don't think we will see it. What we see now, what Annalena Baerbock has also announced yesterday in Kiev, is other types of support, such as by the German a German agency for internet and technical security. But I did wonder too, why now? Because cyber aggressions have been reported by Ukrainian entities, particularly in the eastern region, for quite some time. So why hasn't Germany done more so far? But maybe there will be a new effort now. And I think there was a question referring to some Twitter debate this morning whether British planes were not allowed to fly over Germany. I thought that was debunked, but I'm not entirely sure. I think the German government said there wasn't any refusal to planes overflying German airspace.
Yeah. But I mean, if I can take, because Fraser's Cameron is the one that refers to this, which is related to the answers that both of you just gave and to the previous question. But he has, I think, a more broader question that I would still like to take to both of you, is that what happens if dialogue with Russia just simply fails? So if we move to the next stage, what is Germany, what in your assessment, what is Germany ready to do in a situation that we move into a, let's say, into a re-invasion, even if it's a targeted, operation by Russia? I mean, how would Germany react to this in your assessment? I don't know, Anna, go ahead, and then Christian.
Well, it sounds very harsh, but I don't think Germany would do anything militarily. Annalena Baerbock, as well as others in the German government, have stressed that this is a conflict that can only be resolved by diplomacy. And if Putin decides to take parts of Ukraine, this is what we will see. Germany will try to revive a dialogue within the Normandy format or other. It will certainly sanction Russia, most probably on Nord Stream 2, but we won't see any military involvement. That would be my guess.
I guess we wouldn't even go further and kind of cut off other parts of the energy supplies, because I mean, this is something that you have to bear in mind. We have an ongoing energy partnership with the Russians, and have been completely become dependent to a larger extent. People are disputing how much the dependency is, but there is a dependency on the Russian gas, which for the current situation you can't solve easily unless you're willing to take the hit. But I guess currently, with regard to the energy question, especially, we don't have a proper solution, which in upcoming wintertime is a bad solution. So here the question is, can the government expand its toolbox over the next years to not end up in the same situation? And I agree to what Anna has said on the kind of interesting timing with regard to the offers that came from the Foreign Office. I think it just shows that there is not much that we can offer for the moment. I mean, offering the current situation support by our hydrogen energy agency is something which is just, I mean, you could even argue that is insulting the Ukrainians to say, okay, how does that save any life over the next weeks? It will definitely not do if it comes to an invasion. And I guess we're not ready to take any, it's not about military action. I mean, this is an ongoing conflict with a lot of non-military tools. The question is, are we willing to hit the Russians hard on all the fronts that we can imagine? And are we willing to choose? But I guess definitely we are not. So you will see the Germans, like many other Europeans, possibly being rather quiet in terms of action now.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's a lateral question. It's a very long, so I'm not going to ask the whole question, but it's again the issue of Germany, Russia, Nord Stream 2, but also Poland. You know, how much in terms of Germany's foreign policy does Nord Stream 2 also complicate the relationship that Germany has with Poland? And so I would just sort of, you know, summarize the question this way, but it's to address the issue of Poland. Also, I mean, then knowing what is going on here at the EU level with issues of the rule of law and so on and so forth. So what would be your take on this issue? I don't know, Anna. You have the floor.
Yes, I mean, Nord Stream has been pain point in German-Polish relations ever since the project was born. And I think that on the European level, liberals and the Greens have worked against Nord Stream, trying to use the energy directive that we now see in question again to stop the project, to say that it endangers energy security, not just within Germany, but within Europe, and that it should be stopped. And it could be that this would be used as leverage now, but I think it would be a big step in German-Polish relations if Germans showed some willingness to use Nord Stream as leverage within this conflict now, at least. But I think there's, as far as I know, this really goes deep, and I'm not sure that's going to heal as easily, even if there's a change in the course of action now.
Thank you, Anna. Christian.
Yeah, thanks for taking us step by step through the German dilemmas that we have created in foreign policy so brilliantly over the last decade. I think Nord Stream, yes, of course, it complicates, but it hasn't created the problem. So I mean, this is something where what currently comes out of the Polish government is not linked to strategic, but more to domestic issues. And whether, if we give up Nord Stream 2, if we would do that, would that improve our relationship with Poland significantly? I don't think so. Because it's not only the rule of law, it's also a question of how do you treat Germany as a kind of a reference point for your domestic politics, and say, yeah, you still have to pay back for the mistakes of the Second World War. So you play the emotional card, and it's always written Germany on top of it, which is something we say, come on, this is not looking like it's even from a political transactional point of view. This is not very persuasive for Germany to say, okay, now we are willing to invest into the German-Polish partnership again.
Thank you very much also for being so candid and direct. I think as our time shortens, I won't be able, obviously, to take all the questions. So now I'm going to start pick and choosing. I mean, there's a question here from Vesna Lundquist, which I would still like to take, which is if you could elaborate a little bit on German policy towards EU neighboring countries, and particularly the Western Balkans. I would add enlargement policy. Are we to expect any potential or any changes from coming from Germany on enlargements, either moving forward with the process, or basically staying where we are, where there is not so much appetite anywhere for new enlargements of the EU? Anna and Christian.
I'd really like to pass on that because I'm just not sure. Yeah.
I remember that the several parties did not have much on. I mean, there was not much there. I remember from when I was looking into this in the last year. But I don't know, Christian, is there anything that we could expect, or we just move on to the next issue?
I'm not an expert on that. I think it's because EU is so much in our DNA. I think it would be one of the last things that we would give up, the principal option to enlarge the European Union, especially with regard to the perspective that we have for the Western Balkans. We need to find a kind of gradual solutions, or let's say phased solutions for these countries to give them a perspective. So I guess these arguments will come up. I guess the bigger question is, do we have a sober view in Germany on the potentials of the European Union, and it's also kind of a decades old question of, can we do enlargement while we still haven't fixed the institutional problems that we have? And that's something where it's not a philosophical, I think it's a very practical question that this government has to make an educated guess on, and then deliver on that.
Thank you very much, Christian, and also Anna. If I can turn, I mean, like I said, I'm going to start pick and choosing. There's an issue that we have not yet discussed at length, and I mean, in a couple of days, President Biden will have been in office for a year. So, how do you also see relationship between Germany and the US? I mean, again, the transatlantic relationship in general, also with, I mean, elections coming up in Europe, not only, I mean, in France, in Hungary, but then also the midterm elections in the US. How do you see this relationship evolving over the next year?
How much time is left? No, I think
okay, go ahead.
I think on the one hand, we're in for a promising new start because we have the Greens and the climate policy on the one hand, and we have with the Biden administration, we have an American administration that takes this issue very seriously. Although when you look at the details, the approaches are very different. So in Germany, we go for CO2 pricing, regulating the market, making carbon emissions much more expensive, whereas this is the path that the United States have so far rejected on pursuing. But still, I think that culturally and with a sense of direction, there's a lot of room for cooperation, for technical cooperation, for example, when it comes to wind and solar energy, market exchanges, best practice exchanges. And I think that the United States too would be open to that green idea of a climate club, like a small group of countries or growing group of countries that have more ambitious goals that go first. On the same time, I think that Germany does look at the developments within America's democracy with great concern, and I do believe rightfully so. We've had great setbacks in the United States just last week with the voting rights bill probably not passing in Congress, and this will already play out this year in the midterm elections. And I think this will be very closely watched in Germany, especially as you've mentioned, Ricardo, with so many similarly important elections coming up in Europe, particularly in France.
Thank you, Anna. Christian, your take.
Nothing really to add, because I mean, Anna is such an expert on these things, so I wouldn't add much on these things. I guess the only question is whether we have a long-term perspective or not. There's no long-term perspective on these things because so many things are on the move. Whether we can really speed up and kind of have a new deal or a new idea of how these countries that have become so different over the last years, and it's not only Germany and the US, but also the UK and France as important players in the transatlantic realm, whether we can come back in partnership. It doesn't need to be love, but partnership and a kind of regulated competition that provides a safe haven politically and economically, or an anchor point to rebuild the West to a certain extent, or at least have something that gives us more certainty than the current limbo that we are in.
Thank you. I mean, we are 2 minutes away, so I wanted to touch on a couple of points, and this is a question for both of you of this, let's say, the newer elements that Anna referred in her first intervention, which, I mean, you just referred to some of these issues on climate policy or climate change, or fighting climate change as part of foreign policy, but also the values element that Hannah had brought, and this feminist foreign policy. I would like to ask you, I mean, both of you, and how first you see both of these areas evolving, and whether, you know, let's say the German, let's say machinery, foreign policy machinery, are they ready, and they are sort of, you know, are they buying into these new priorities of the German government? I would assume that the machinery follows the leadership, but how do you see this taking forward? And also, what might be the influence of having these topics so high in the agenda for the EU and for the rest of member states? Anna, and then Christian.
I think it's hard to say at this early stage. We've seen some shuffling of positions and departments within the government. There was a department that was now shifted, I believe, from the Ministry for Economic Development to the Foreign Office that is already working on international climate policies. I don't know yet how well these staffers are integrated, what impact they will have. I think that's something we will see in the next months. I do believe there's quite some energy in it, because with that, when you look at it from an interior perspective, we have Annalena Baerbock, who now has to prove after a campaign that did not go well for her, that she's still one of the top policymakers in Germany. So she will definitely try to develop a very distinct profile. And I believe she's very ambitious in stealing away some of the competences from the Chancellery and making the Foreign Office. But of course, at the moment, that's just an ambition, and I have no idea how well this will work out with. I mean, right now, as she said, she hasn't worked on anything but the current crisis in the past days and nights, as she put it. And as for feminist foreign policy, this has been an issue in the German Foreign Office under Heiko Maas too. So he's already cooperated with some experts like Christina Lunz on the issue. But when it came to really doing something, I'm thinking of the withdrawal from Afghanistan. We've seen some efforts, particularly helping women leaving the country, but those mostly came from NGOs and it wasn't a focus at that moment, in my perception. I don't know how Christian sees it, in the German government nor the German Foreign Office. We do see more women promoted to higher positions within the German government, and the coalition treaty says they want to do that on the international level too. But again, it's all rhetoric right now, and we'll have to see the action.
Thank you very much, Anna, for those also sobering words. It's a lot about implementation. Sort of, these are plans, these are ambitions. How do they translate into concrete policies? Christian, your last words on this respect, I would say.
Yeah, very short on. So it's very much about the mechanics and machine room, as you said, Ricardo. The implementation needs people, and we are short of them. We are short of climate experts. So there were two models that have been discussed during the coalition agreements like time before. Whether you build a new ministry or you focus your energy in a kind of a center of gravity, or whether you say, no, hold on, it's a mainstream issue. So we basically have to have kind of, focal points everywhere to mainstream things like climate change, like gender rights, like digitalization, like preventive politics across the board in all the government. However you come up with it, we still lack the people who are capable of doing it, who have the knowledge base and can bring that into whatever kind of bureaucracy, and by that making it a reference point of the everyday life of the new government. So this will be, I guess, the biggest challenge for the government, to find the people to implement this very important agenda. And the second turn is, although we kind of also in our report on smart sovereignty, we said, look, guys, you have to understand that foreign policy is basic domestic politics, and you can't divide it. But of course, 90% of the people still think first domestic politics and then they think foreign policy, and do not realize in the first instance that if you want to have an effective climate policy, if you want to have an effective digitalization strategy, you need to have partners across the globe. So it will cost us a little bit of more time to hopefully persuade more people to go for international solutions, because otherwise there is no solution on these generational issues that Germany has to solve in its country.
Thank you, Christian, for those last words. Also, that gives us a little bit of hope on how we actually can find solutions to these problems. And this, again, that comes out in your study very much, whereby the domestic and the external policies are much more intertwined, and so there's really not a barrier between both realms. There are one realm, so to say. So thank you again. I mean, it remains to me, first of all, to apologize for going over time for 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Also to all our participants that asked so many questions, I couldn't bring them all. But I mean, it remains for me to thank you, Anna. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Hannah Neumann. She's not with us now, but thank you, the three of you, for allowing us to learn a little bit more about the new German foreign policy of the new government. Also to looking at the nuance and the areas where we should be paying attention over the next year. And I'm sure that we could continue this conversation easily for another hour. There are so many issues, so many other topics to pin down and to discuss. But I think we will stay here now, also on behalf of Connecting Europe, also the GAP that partnered with us in organizing this. Christian, you're here, but thank you again for everybody for joining, and please come again, and we look forward to seeing you both soon, and also all our participants. Thank you very much.